Hello, it's Ed Woodall here from A Sense of Movement. This is the Wednesday evening guest spot, and this evening we have Dee Keane, who is a trainer and teacher with a passion for learning. So I'm going to introduce her in a couple of minutes or a minute or so. Before I just remind you that every week a group member comes on and has a chat with me, and we discuss issues to do with, well, anything vaguely connected to isolation, consolation, Feldenkrais movement, awareness, learning, a whole raft of different things. And everybody in the group at some point, I hope, will come and chat. But you don't have to, by the way, but I think it would be nice to just meet everyone eventually and share something. So I think we should probably get Dee in. So I'm just going to magic her on. There she is. After what I know has been a long day's work already. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Ed. Yeah, I'm fine. Bit screened out, but looking forward to doing this.
Was it interesting screen stuff? Did you have an enjoyable time?
It was. It's a program that I run for a mental health charity about professional boundaries and knowing where we draw the line and finding out whether the other party agrees with where the line is drawn.
Oh man, that sounds so interesting.
It is actually.
Can you give us a little bit of a flick? Yeah, because I'm sure sometimes I bundle into things without the correct procedure. I don't know. I think I've got good manners, but some people think I haven't. I'm fascinated to know the sort of things that you were discussing or teaching.
Well, the classic scenario would be for a lot of organisations, particularly in the caring professions, you might have a scenario where somebody who's been a service user or a client becomes a volunteer. So they shift into a different role, a different identity. So the boundaries have to be renegotiated. And then you might get them over a course of time doing some paid session work. So now they're a sessional employee. Have the boundaries changed again? And then they might embark on a whole career. Loads of people in the caring professions have followed that route in. And as you become a professional, you have to rethink your boundaries and what's okay, what's possible. Things like if you work and live in the same community, what do you do when one of your clients meets you in the supermarket and your trolley is full of gin? And, how do you elegantly and respectfully go, do you know what, I'm not talking to you, I'm busy.
Yes.
So you have to think about those kind of boundaries, and particularly people who've experienced mental distress, they might want to challenge the boundaries and test it. When I was a youth worker, that was certainly the case. Young people wanted to know, is that a boundary? Is that a real boundary? Have you made that one up? Is that a rule that I have to pay attention to or not? It's what young people do magnificently. Yeah. And I think it's relevant to what we're going to talk about in terms of learning as well, that whole boundary between the teacher or trainer or instructor and the learner.
Okay. Fabulous. Yes, I once had some couples therapy actually with somebody and with a therapist, and she was very clear. She was really clear. She said, "If I see you in public, please don't be offended, but I will not acknowledge you."
Yeah.
It felt a bit weird. It felt a bit like a kind of a bit of a sort of rejection or something. But of course, as soon as we thought about it, it was utterly clear that.
The reason for it is safety. It creates safety for you and safety for the practitioner. Sure. And you're a hands-on practitioner when you do Feldenkrais.
Yeah.
There's a lot of boundary stuff to be considered when you are in physical touch with your learners.
Yes. I mean, and interestingly, it's stuff that, I mean, Feldenkrais is sort of, I'm going to say notoriously, sort of loose boundaried in some ways. I mean, we go through this extraordinary 4-year training where touching people left, right, and centre. We have people from the public come in. We touch them. We do, of course. There are guidelines. There is common sense. There is sort of a kind of consensus, but it's not particularly well regulated or formulated. Certainly in my practice, and I, as a professional, having gone professional 2 or 3 years ago, I have, I've had 1 or 2, unfortunate misunderstandings, and for which
moments of learning.
Yes. And yeah, I put my hand up to say that there is room for improvement. So I'm absolutely fascinated. Perhaps I should have a session with you on boundaries. That would be good. So how, just briefly, obviously I think you're the first guest to come back for the second time. So thank you very much.
I'm a glutton for punishment.
And how things been since we last met? How's lockdown, COVID world for you? Summer, swimming. What's changed? What's improved? If anything?
It's a kind of constant state of flux, really. For my swimming teaching, I normally teach in 3 different pools. Only one of them has reopened.
Wow.
So I'm thankful for that, and I'm really pleased with the way they are running it. So 1 day a week I'm teaching swim again, which is fantastic, and I'm really glad to be back. The other 2 pools, I have to wait for them to get themselves organised. One of them is in a retirement apartment complex, so they are obviously going to be very, very cautious about their demographic that they have there, and that's absolutely fine. And I think they are gradually reopening their pool for the residents, but it'll be a while before outsiders like myself can go back in. So in terms of swimming, putting a lot of energy into getting my head around the guidelines.
Okay. Can you just give it, because I actually haven't been back to a pool yet. I would like to. I'm a little unfit, I will admit, and I need to get back. I've got someone who's desperately trying to get into this talk, so I might get you talking and then attend to him. What are the guys? I mean, what's different in a pool now? What do you have to do as a swimmer and as a teacher? And I'm going to disappear for a sec when you explain that to the folk.
Okay. So in terms of swimming teaching, what enables us to get back in the water once a pool has opened, because that's obviously the biggest hurdle, slightly depends on your learner group. So if you teach groups of children or parents and babies or parents and toddlers, that's a whole complex set of guidance about what you can and can't do. For a while, we were encouraged not to get in the water with our learners, and I teach one-to-one, I teach adults, I'm always in the water with them. So I had to think about how do we maintain social distance between myself and the learner, and there's the option for me to wear a visor. Interestingly, most people don't want me to. We don't wear masks because they're actually a hazard if they get wet.
Yeah.
But visors are a possibility for some people are wearing them. The biggest headache was what's called bather load. It's the number of people you can have in a pool at any one time. Don't ask me, because it's just hell on earth. It's one of the reasons
the pool's this big, we can have 10 people in. I mean, or something.
It's one of the reasons some of the pools can't reopen, because they can't get the number of people right for the space they've got. And then when you've got lanes and directing people in particular directions up and down the lanes, and at one point no one was allowed to swim butterfly because you might cut into someone's social distance.
Yeah, that could be a rule for anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of people who said, "Oh, good, no butterfly." But, yeah, so the stuff like that, and of course all the hygiene and cleanliness, which is just, Britain must be the cleanest it's ever been. I can't believe how clean everything is. But things like
Wow.
cleaning our equipment and cleaning floats, for God's sake, but if someone touches them, they need to be cleaned.
Okay. Even though you're in chlorine, I mean, the whole place is sort of being bacteria busted the whole time.
Actually, in the water is one of the best places you can be because of all the chemicals. There's a slight debate about whether swimming pool chemicals really do deal with COVID, but
What do you
who
think?
knows? Who knows?
Okay.
Well, I haven't the faintest idea.
One of my first impression, my first thoughts, and maybe it's preventing me from going back to the pool, is that one of the great things about swimming is that you are breathing deeply, and when you turn your head for breath or whatever it is, you're taking quite a big breath in. So if there's something in the air, then you are kind of inhaling. I mean, however, I would breathe slowly out, downwards into the bubble, into the water. So that is one advantage, I suppose, of a good swimming style, is that you're breathing down carefully into the water. I slightly answered my own question, actually, because I was going to say, I don't want people, breathing out heavily all around me. But is anyone concerned about this? Or
there's all sorts of research done about where droplets fall and how far they travel. And so while you were out of the studio, I was saying about if you teach children, it is more complex, partly because they're a bit trickier to regulate. And, the fact that they like taking bites out of the noodle floats. Don't know why, but they do.
I didn't know that.
They like taking bites out of the noodle floats, out of the woggles. Yeah, if you ever look at a noodle float, it will have chunks bitten out of it.
Yeah,
It's a sensory thing with kids.
Yeah, well, they shouldn't have called them noodles then, should they?
Well, good point. Good point. So there's all that sort of stuff, but there's masses of precautionary thinking that has to be taken into account. And I'm lucky. I teach individuals. I teach adults primarily. I do teach some kids, but I'm not at the moment. So it's all adults for me. So that was the swimming.
Okay. And can I? So you call yourself a it's going to go back, a trainer and a teacher with a passion for learning. Now, can you describe what it is to be a teacher or a trainer? What's the difference between being a teacher and a trainer who's not passionate about learning and one that is passionate about learning? Why have you made that distinction?
Ooh. I think if you're a teacher or trainer and you're not passionate about learning, you must have a very dull life. If you're not really interested in it, and I think all good teachers and trainers are passionate about learning. They're really interested in what helps and what hinders, what's going to make the difference. How can I make my subject more yummy? How can I make people really want to get their heads around this? How can I do things that will make it exciting and stimulating for people? Which is kind of where the psychological hungers come in, actually.
Okay, well, tell you what it's.
You would work it in somehow.
It's 6:15, so it is time actually to have a go at those. One thing I was just thinking recently about I'm definitely passionate about learning as a subject, and I still think I'd like to have a longer conversation with you. Unpick why are we interested in learning? Why don't we just go, hey, look, here's a thing, and then there's the learning of it. Why get all sort of wrapped up in the process of learning? That might seem to some people to be, that's just the middle ground. That's the middleman. But we can't go into that in detail today. But I'm still want a date with you to really get to grips with why it's interesting to some people, and we could discuss why it's interesting to us. Then maybe other people will go, right, well, I am really interested in learning, but I haven't quite understood how I'm interested in learning or what it is about learning as opposed to the thing that gets learned. I think that's a genuinely interesting subject. But no, go on.
Well, all I was going to say on that was, as you know, in my dry land work, I train hospital doctors in teaching skills. And when I can help them get their head around the fact it's not so much about your content. Your subject is interesting, but it's how you're going to make a connection with your learners that is going to make the difference. And the long and the short of it is, and this is why actually we find it fascinating, is because learning is a relational process. It's about relationship. So as human beings, we are really interested in relationships and how to be in relation with each other. And once a teacher gets their head around the fact this is a relational activity, then suddenly it is really, really juicy and interesting and endlessly fascinating. But I would say that because I'm passionate about it.
Yeah, yeah. But again, that's interesting. I'm fascinated by that. What does it mean relational in this context? You know, and I think generally, you know, we're moving away from the idea of the keeper of knowledge who dispenses knowledge out from on high, and thankfully so. But I think it's a very deeply held assumption that he or she who has the information will then divvy it out. You know, and I was doing some fascinating work last year up at Leeds Beckett with Theresa Brayshaw, and I'm not going to get her name right now. Sarah Richardson, I can't quite remember. Anyway, wonderful. I must get her name. I'll put it below. Wonderful pedagogue, teacher, and really talking about what her work through stories, getting the stories from children, so completely reversing the thing around where adults used to make up stories for children. The work that she's doing is getting children to kind of workshop, brainstorm their own stories, and then kind of reverse the process. And that struck me as a wonderful idea that the whole thing between the generations could be and perhaps should be more relational than us older ones passing stuff on. But again, another complex, wonderful landscape, which we haven't quite got time for today. So if you're okay, I'm going to just literally hand over to you, and I'm going to follow what you're doing and report back later.
Lovely.
Are we good?
Yep.
See you in about 15 then.
See you in a bit. Okay, so, well, that conversation with Ed has kind of set my brain off in 16 different directions. When we first talked about me doing this slot, we were talking about the process of learning and the journey that learners go on. And we were talking about a model which suggests 4 stages of competence and confidence and how people progress through that. It's an old, well-established idea that we start not knowing we don't even know, blissful ignorance, and that we move from that unconscious incompetence through to, actually, maybe my life would be better if I did learn how to drive a car, for example, or ride a bike. So we become conscious of our incompetence. And then we work on the skills, we do a course, we get teachers to intervene, we read up, whatever it is, we learn, which takes us to being conscious of our competence. And those are the people who are having driving lessons and they're getting to pass their test, and they can do it if they concentrate. Don't distract them, because they need to pay attention to their competence. And what we long for as learners is that moment of ease and flow. And I get people in swimming tuition saying to me again and again, will it ever get easy? Will I ever be able to do this without thinking? Will it just feel, I could just go? And the answer is yes. But that's where the hard work has to happen. You've got to practice, you've got to develop the skills, you've got to develop muscle memory, you've got to get your head around the information, whatever it is. Now, those were the 4 stages that took you to unconscious competence and the joy of being able to do it on autopilot. And you heard me say a few minutes ago that I teach hospital doctors. And when we talk about this model, I always say to them, and these days, being unconsciously competent is not enough. It's dangerous because that's where mistakes happen and it's where people get blasé and things go wrong. And every doctor in the room nods and goes, oh, yeah, that's true. And they have loads of scenarios that they can think of. The driving analogy means that, you know, that moment where you've driven home and you get to your front door and you think, oh, how did I get here then? That's because you've been on autopilot, unconsciously competent of your driving skills. It's easy. You were thinking about 16 other things, not talking on your mobile phone, listening to music, doing all sorts. And it's dangerous. So these days, most of us who are learning practitioners don't stop at level 4. We're interested in level 5, which I call being a reflective practitioner. So having reflective competence means that you're thinking about, I can do that. Can I do it any better? Could I do it more efficiently with greater sophistication, greater pleasure? And in the water for swimming, you can imagine that quite easily. You know, I've been a swimmer since I was 7. But it's only in the past, well, let's say 15 years since I discovered the Shaw method in particular and total immersion and other ideas about sophisticated swimming, how to swim with grace and ease and pleasure, not just ploughing up and down, knowing I can do it and not thinking about what I'm doing. That's how I injured my neck, being unconsciously competent. But being reflectively competent means you're always thinking, okay, that's interesting. What next? What could I do? So I think the mark of a good learner is someone who is not just wanting ease, but is wanting ongoing development, which of course can be a bit tiresome because it means the learning never stops. Okay, so that's where Ed and I started talking about conscious and unconscious competence. And the question I had in my mind throughout our conversations was, well, what sort of a learner are you then, Ed? If you're the learner, what floats your boat? What helps you learn? What makes it pleasurable for you as a process? What helps the relationship between the teacher and the learner? And some of that is to do with learning styles and learning preferences, and there are various models that we could talk about probably another time to do with that. But a short way of doing it would be, are you a visual learner? Are you looking at the stuff that's behind me on the screen? Are you tantalized by the images? Are you an auditory learner? Could you sit there with your eyes shut and just listen to me talking? And are you noticing the background noises that are going on because I've got the window open? Are you thinking, oh, that was an interesting way she used her voice. Oh, what was that squeak in her voice, etc.? Or are you a kinesthetic learner who's going, yeah, but I'd really like to have a bit more hands-on and practical application of this. How do we feel that? How do we use all our senses? And you can sometimes spot a kinesthetic learner because they're the ones quite often fidgeting. Some people are just fidgets, but they're actually stimulating the nerve endings in their fingertips, which is helping the electrical activity in their brain. So people who are playing with bits of blue tack, unwinding paper clips, whatever it is, thinking, twiddling their hair, sometimes that's a sensory thing for them. These days, we're much more accepting of that. You know, you used to get slapped across the knuckles with a ruler for fidgeting. I'd like to think that doesn't happen anymore. But that triggers another thought in my head, which is to do with adult learners, and I specialize in adult learning, both in the water and on dry land. Adult learners bring all of their history with them. Children do too, they've just got less history. So some of my learners in the water are in their 80s and 90s. And I have one of them in mind who really struggled with a particular aspect of the swimming tuition. And I said to her, what would help you to get your head around this and to really be able to do it? And she said, well, you could teach me the same way that my piano teacher used to teach me. So I thought, oh, okay, this is helpful. This is what sort of learner she is. This is what she understands about the learning relationship. I said, oh, great, okay. How did your piano teacher do it? And she said, she used to hit me across the knuckles. I thought, oh, okay. It's not going to happen really, is it? But it was useful for me to hear her talk about what she expected learning to be like. It would be punitive, it would be tough, but it would be rigorous. So I thought, okay, I will up the rigor. I won't do the actual physical molestation, but it was interesting to hear her voice, what she needed as a learner, based on her history of learning. And people have very checkered histories sometimes. So the other idea that sprang into my head that I thought you might find interesting in terms of how people learn and what they need from us when we're teaching them, in whatever setting it is, people have hungers, people have needs, and it's useful for us to think about those needs and whether we can help them be met. So there is a model which talks about psychological hungers in particular. It's part of a larger model, but these three are stimulation, recognition, and structure. I'm just shifting the camera so that hopefully you can see my display there. So what do they mean in terms of learners and what they need from us to make it a successful learning partnership? Because I'm really keen on the notion that this is a two-way street. You're not an empty vessel and I'm filling you up with my wisdom. You've got stuff to bring to the table. You've got interesting experience, ideas, thoughts, beliefs, and they will affect how you receive whatever it is I'm trying to teach you. So, for example, the teaching, the methodology, the content needs to be stimulating. It needs to be interesting. You don't want to be bored. You don't want to be turned off intellectually or socially. And I need to give you enough brain food for the level of hunger that you have. So some people are really, really, really hungry for stimulation. They have a low boredom threshold. They will get things quickly. They want to move on to the next thing. They want to go, brilliant, now I've made 16 connections. That's fine. I've got it. Lovely. What should we do next? And how about? Woo, woo, woo. And that's great. And they can be really energetic learners. Might need a bit of controlling sometimes. But there'll be other people who'll go, no, 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 no. Just give me one clear chunk and I'll deal with that. Let me process that. Let me work on that. Let me absorb it. Let me digest it. That's quite enough food for now. And those are the kind of two extremes when we're talking about stimulation in learners. They're neither right nor wrong. They just are. And as teachers, we need to be mindful of that and on the lookout for clues about who's hungry for more stimulation, who's not hungry for more stimulation. So thinking about their digestive processes. The second one of these psychological hungers is recognition. And what I mean by that is acknowledgement. Human beings, as a species, are terrified that we don't actually exist. It's an existential issue. We want to know that we really do exist and that the other people the rest of the world knows we exist. So we're desperate for some strokes of recognition from each other. And interestingly, at the moment, this format gives me no strokes of recognition whatsoever because I have no idea if anybody's out there. Ed's somewhere in the background and but here he comes. He nearly popped into the world there. So I'm kind of doing this without any strokes of recognition. I'm hoping someone's watching and finding it interesting, ideally. If you're not finding it interesting, you're finding it annoying, that's a different stroke of recognition. It's not a positive one, but I'll go with it because any stroke is better than no stroke. Human beings want psychological strokes from each other. And in the workplace, we get strokes of recognition from salary, identity, status, those things, but also from our learners. So the people who say, "Oh God, that was fantastic. I so enjoyed that. It was really useful to me. That was really helpful." You can just feel your heart expand as a teacher when they say that sort of thing. I also really enjoy it when people say, "This is really hard. I didn't expect learning to swim front crawl to be so damn tricky." That's interesting for me, and it helps me think about how to work with them. It's a stroke of recognition. It's about what we're engaged in together. So they are responding to me. The people who shrug, they're the trickiest of all for me as a teacher, because I don't know what we're dealing with. Okay, so the third one is structure. Human beings like to know what shape the world is. They quite like the world to be the same shape when they get up in the morning as it was when they went to bed the night before. We get discombobulated by sudden, unexpected structural shifts. COVID-19, I'm looking at you. So all things that have been happening to us recently have been messing with our hungers, and structure is a particularly vivid one. We used to go out to work. We used to go swimming in pools. We used to socialize with our friends. We used to do all sorts of things. And what is it I'm supposed to be doing today? I don't know, because they moved the goalposts again. And that messing with the structure is very disconcerting for us as human beings. Now, some people are more troubled by it than others because their hunger for structure is higher or lower. There are plenty of people who go, "I don't mind how you structure the course, Dee. I'll leave it in your hands. I trust you. It's fine. I'll go with the flow. I don't mind." And then there's people going, "Did you say we were having a tea break in 6 minutes? And what will we be doing in half an hour's time? And I'd like to know, please, and what are the assessment criteria now?" I'm being a bit sarcastic about it, but people who want a lot of structure, they will make that need known somehow. And as a teacher, I have an obligation and a duty to notice it and respond. Sometimes my answer is, "We'll have a break in 10 minutes. Trust me, we'll be fine." Sometimes my answer is, "You're absolutely right. I was slipping with the structure there. It's time we had a break. Let's stop now." So being responsive and maintaining the relationship between us as teachers and our learners is going to make the biggest difference. Having snazzy PowerPoints, having great content, having important things to teach is part of it. But the connection that we make with our learners is much, much more. And paying attention to their hungers and their needs, particularly psychological needs, will pay huge dividends and make the learning richer. So that's why I thought you'd be interested to hear about psychological hungers. It's one of the models from transactional analysis. There's a lot written about it in those fields, but I love it because it's very easily applicable to our different situations. It doesn't have to be a therapeutic or psychotherapeutic tool. It can be something to hold in your mind that can sometimes explain to you why people are being a little odd because they're trying to get their psychological needs met. And I teach this model a lot to staff groups because I think if it's language that we can use with each other, we can be more forgiving as well with each other. We can go, okay, that's her need for recognition. I mustn't forget to say to her, do you know what? You're doing a damn fine job. Or, as happened in the group I was running earlier, someone saying, please don't come up to me going, you did a really good job today, because I can't bear it. It doesn't feel authentic and I don't want you coming being wussy with me. So people have different hungers and they will voice it differently. And if we are sophisticated practitioners, we'll notice that and we'll know how to deal with it, respond, build it into our toolkit and our repertoire. When people want more stimulation, the worst thing you can have is boredom, and that's lack of stimulation. When things are dull and understimulating, then actually people can get tricky, because what will happen is people will create stimulation. So sometimes in a team where they're struggling because there's a difficult dynamic, do you know, sometimes it's because one or more people are understimulated. The job isn't ticking the box for them anymore. And it's not malicious or malevolent. It's 9 times out of 10 absolutely unconscious and out of their awareness, but they'll be provoking something. They'll be poking the ant's nest with a sharp stick to stimulate things, to make it interesting again. And we get that as teachers, people being provocative because they want more stimulation. So sometimes it would be easy for us to think of, oh, that's a tricky learner, that's a disruptive influence in the group. Are they? Or have they got a high hunger for stimulation? So that's the 3 psychological hungers model, which I hope will help inform your teaching and also help you think about yourself as a learner. Because if we know our own hungers, we can manage ourselves as learners. Hello, Ed, you're back.
Yeah, I've been here all the time. Actually, I've just been just fascinated and really kind of nourished by that. You know, and I'm thinking. Well, one of the things I'm thinking about is actually isolation, consolation. Thinking about stimulation, recognition, structure, and I think it's a really it's such a simple but also very rich model. Those 3 things are fantastically broad in some senses, and they seem to me to be, yes, absolutely kind of primary to you know, I mean, I was just thinking about, I was watching Louis Theroux from years ago, kind of weird weekends, and watching him. There was a program that I was watching yesterday about kids in America who are being, you know, put on Ritalin and ADHD and drugs and and it's beautifully done, actually. And you just think about, you know, stimulation, recognition, structure, you know, and parenting. I mean, or just families in general, you know, groups. These 3 things absolutely sort of are in a constant cycle with one another, aren't they?
Well, of course, the family is where we learn this stuff as children. This is where we discover, oh, that's what happens if I am provocative. Oh, that's what happens if I am needy and wanting reassurance. That's what happens if there's no structure in my family. So that's where we learned all this stuff as children in our families, and it's where we practice it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, as I say, it's. I love a schema. I love some sort of, you know, I'm always looking for structures that that aid me to understand other people better. Hopefully, you know, I am a teacher. I've got to admit it. That's what I do. You know, I'm a teacher and a learner, and it's you know, it's the bread of life for me. So I'm really grateful for you having it. Someone's just said, love that explanation, and told like this, I think it's told like this, I think it's obvious. You know, it's like, yeah, it's like in Feldenkrais we have our elusive obviouses, and this is a wonderful example of it. You go, well, of course that's what's going on in a classroom. Of course that's what's going on in a family. But, you know, most of us need pretty consistent reminding of things that are just outside of our cognition. You know, those things that when we get emotional, when we get tired, we all need structures, it seems to me, to hold on to. Otherwise, it can get, you know, frayed. And
you've given me a great opportunity there to actually publicly thank you, because when lockdown struck and my working life disappeared in a puff of smoke or a splash of water, one of the things that I found incredibly useful was getting up to do your free classes at 9 o'clock each morning, because it gave me structure. Because the structure had been whipped away in all sorts of different ways for all of us at that point. But I remember thinking, this is really good. It's just half an hour where I know what I'm going to be doing, and I'll think about the rest of the day after this, but this is a starting point. So I wanted to publicly thank you for providing that.
Very kind of you to say so.
You met my hunger for structure.
I have some interesting news. Part of what I'm thinking of is going back to a slightly more similar model for the rest of the year, or maybe even a whole year. So I will let everybody know what that is all about. But look, I think you've had a long day. You were brilliant, so clear. And thanks very much for coming on again. I have a feeling you'll be back at some point. But look, yeah, thanks a lot, and see you soon. I'm just going to wrap up, and maybe if you want to stick around in the studio, we can have a chat. But please don't feel you have to if you want to get on with your, you know, your evening. So yeah, big thanks, and see you soon, Dee.
Thanks, Ed. See you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye. So there we go, Dee Keane, whose website is DK Learning. As I say, she is a learning mentor, although she doesn't like the word mentor, or we're potentially going to have a discussion about what the difference between a coach and a mentor is. Maybe I'll save that for some other time. Just to say that there is a short free at source lesson on Friday morning, although I might take quite a bit of the lesson, the time on Friday, to explain what's going to happen next in Isolation Consolation. I'm actually finding the time now that we're going into sort of weirder and more difficult in some ways than even the first time round. There was something about the first time round when we locked down that was, oh, I don't know, this is a hoot. You know, I don't have to go out, don't have to see anyone. This is kind of interesting. Have I got enough food? Well, I better stock up the freezer, and, you know, and there was something kind of, you know, it was worrying, but it was novel. And now I just think we're in a kind of, it's so weird. This kind of normal, not normal. Now we've got the rule of 6 in the UK, gatherings of no more than 6 people, and yet people are being carted off to work, and you know, it's a mess. So I'm hoping to go back and do some more Isolation Consolation. I'm going to up the ante. I'm going to go back to once a day and see if I can hack it. And see if that will be nice for you too. So for those in the UK, don't forget, if you've enjoyed this, please give the video a like. I'm sure Dee would like those strokes of recognition. Yeah, and there's some great comments coming in. Thanks very much. You know, do ask your questions, but do give the video a like. It does help the whole thing go round smoothly. So that is really it. Yeah, just once again, big thanks to Dee, and I'll put all her information on the post, and you can all you know, find out more about what she does, because I think she's been doing it a long time, and you can kind of feel it in her. There's a certain authority that comes from someone who's really invested in her practice, and that's one of the things that really attracts me about her. So there we go. That's it. Oh, and it's Lisa Stevenson, the woman I was referring to. If she happens to be watching it, I do feel sorry that I lost your name for a moment, but I will post something about you as well. In fact, what's brilliant is that she's just posted on, sorry Dee, I can see that you're still there, and I will come back. I'll come back to you in a sec, but Lisa just posted a few minutes ago on Facebook a brilliant looking article about, oh goodness me, what was it? My phone's about to run out of charge, but I want to find this because it's so sort of apposite that just as I was talking about her, she's posted something called Lead Yourself First, How Mind-Body Education Can Catalyze Social and Global Change. So she's definitely in our bigger team, isn't she? Lead Yourself First, How Mind-Body Education Can Catalyze Social and Global Change. I mean, that is so isolation consolation. I can't begin to say. I will definitely be reposting that. Thanks for your lovely comments. I'm warbling now, so I'm going to go. Lots of love. Bye.